I then went to my father and said, Dad, this was amazing. Could we start a business together? Would you help me? We'll give you £500 for your 21st birthday present. And off you go. And that was the beginning of Mulberry. £500 just about paid for the stationery and opened the bank account.
Roger Saul, founder of Mulberry.
And I suppose the big difference between us and pretty much everybody else in the fashion industry then was I was the designer, the producer, the wholesaler, and then ultimately we became retailers. The process of designing, manufacturing and wholesaling, most of the dress designers would be going to a third company to produce.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have their own factories. And that's why so many designers failed, because they had no idea how to sell or no idea how to manufacture. They could make beautiful things, but actually they couldn't produce it in volume.
Welcome to FounderMetrics by Vested, the podcast that delves deep into the anatomy of business triumphs and the strategies behind the commercial success. I'm your host, Ifty Nasir, founder and CEO of Vested, and I'm so excited to take you on a journey into a world of inspiring founders. Hello, and welcome back to FounderMetrics. I'm Ifty Nasir, your host, and today we've got Roger Saul, founder of Mulberry and now of Sharpham Farm. So, Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. Just tell us a little bit about your background before Mulberry.
Right. Well, I was the son of sort of ex-war parents. They'd moved down to Somerset after the Second World War. Both were army officers. Got married right at the end of the Second World War. And my father joined Clark's Shoes as a sort of management trainee. And so 4 children. I was the second one. Brought up, remember having to get the bus to school 10 miles away, age 5.
Yeah.
So very different times then. Then I went to boarding school at age 11 to Kingswood in Bath. Thrived after the initial sort of, whoa, I'm away from my parents and everything I know, my brothers and sisters.
So just remind me, how old were you when you first went to boarding school?
10, 11.
10.
Yeah. So quite, stark dormitories with very cold steel beds, and you could almost see the frost inside the dormitories in the winter. But once I got used to it, I thrived, and I was always a little bit of a daydreamer, so I'd be sort of thinking about something else, and the dust board would whistle past my ear. But I paid enough attention to do okay, and then I found sport and just loved it. So I was an athlete and a rugby player and loved all that sports side, and became captain of rugby athletics and ran for Somerset and ran the English championships and things, and played rugby for Bath. So that sort of challenge of sport and excitement really.
Yeah. But that almost in of itself is great accolade. Running...
Well, it means you're competing, you're performing, and when you're captain, you're leading a team, and we were the most successful team the school had ever had. And bizarrely, they invited us back for I think it was probably our 50th anniversary of, we were called the Invincibles, and they invited the team back, and there were probably a dozen of us left, if that, probably, who could walk. And I remember we got invited back, and my great mate, Reg, who's a Ghanaian, he and I had been captain and vice captain, and we were there. And they said, would you like to actually do anything on the sports team? Yeah, we'd love to do the relay. And so we had 3 of the original relay team there, bizarrely. And so we sat down. They said, well, we'll mix you in with the school so you've got a good chance of competing. And now, of course, the boys and girls, where we'd just been boys. And we said, no, we'd be very happy doing it on our team. Yeah. So we put our team together and sort of thought about it afterwards. And in the next... As you're aware, I was the last leg always of the relay, last 100 metres. And as I was looking across, the girl next to me in the next lane said, "So, really cool shoes and glasses. Where did you get those from?" "Oh, you're Mr. Mulberry, aren't you?" And I was wearing my Paul Smith trainers, which were not suitable for a cinder track. But anyway.
But they looked cool anyway.
Yeah. I sort of realised Reg set off, and Reg would normally be, right at the front of it. He seemed to be a long way behind the rest. And then I remembered, actually, Red had only just had a triple bypass. He handed over to the next guy, who was a cross-country champion. Of course, he was slow anyway. By the time it got to number 3, we were well behind. But on the third changeover, number 3 tripped over He actually broke his finger doing that, but don't worry about that. So by the time he got to me, everybody else had waved gone. So I just really enjoyed running down and dipped to the line. Got a cheer.
Well done, Roger. Well
and
done.
then Monty said to me afterwards, my wife, she said, "What the hell were you doing, you stupid man?" But we had fun and we laughed. Laughed all the way home.
And that's the way to do it. I mean, you should never stop having fun and laughing. Coming back to the clerks piece, I think that's a little bit of the story as well, isn't it? So tell us more about your dad and clerks.
Well, he became manager of the biggest shoe factory in the world, which was a few miles away from home. And effectively, they had the latest high-tech machinery, and the leather had to be so clean, if you like. They ended up putting plastic finishes off and rubbing it off to create an antique look. So in today's terms, it was horrible. But in practice, they had machines that could actually do all the cutting, so the cutters didn't have to do it by hand. And that was the whole game. So they were making 60,000 pairs of shoes a week. I was sort of fascinated in the tech side of it. And my father worked so hard. He'd work on Saturday mornings, and so I'd go in on Saturday mornings and twiddle my thumbs and play around with bits of leather and so on. Just because I liked to be close to him. And he was a real man manager, had a huge respect from all his team. So I grew up with that. Anyway, I got a scholarship for some extraordinary reason to go to Westminster College, and I was sponsored by a company called Charrington Gardner Lockett, solid fuel, based in Surbiton. And I'd got it simply because at interview they'd said, well, what do you enjoy doing? And I said, well, obviously my sport, but I've set up trading in Victorian military uniforms because I love them and I collect them. And I would hitchhike up to London with my uniform or two, and I managed to get a guy on Portobello Road called Bob Pandy, who had a stand selling silver fox furs and wolf coats and things. I said, could I possibly have a little corner on your stand and sell my military uniform? Well, okay, I suppose so. Give me 10%, and yeah, sure. So I'd go up every now and then with my uniform and sell a uniform. We had people like the Rolling Stones come by and so on. So it was that magic of Portobello Road of trading, but trading in things you loved. Yeah, and it was that thing of trading in things you loved, or finding a way of something you loved being part of your life. So that was the beginning. As soon as I got to London, this old mate, Reg, who did the 400-metre relay some years later, he was working with a man called John Michael in Guys and Dolls and the Westerner, selling 501 Levi's and the cool sort of place. And I thought, Charrington Gardner Lockett, Surbiton, this is wrong. So I rang up John Michael and said, asked if I could have a meeting with him and could I become his business study trainee. I guess Reg probably helped in getting me that interview. And he was just amused. And he said, what's a business management trainee? And I said, well, I'll help you do all your business side. I hadn't a clue what I was doing because I hadn't got to business college at that stage. Anyway, he took me on. I think also because my father rang up in consternation afterwards and said, you will look after my son, won't you? And, he is going to go far, so you must. So Pa was there in the background sort of making sure I was okay. And so that was the beginning. And I cleaned out the stationery cupboard. I made the coffee. And then I got a job in one of the shops selling gifts and all sorts of things in Guys and Dolls in Oxford Street. And I had hippies coming off the street with their belts saying, hey, man, do you want to sell my belts? And I'd buy them and we'd make a huge profit, 300% or something. And I was thinking, wow, this is pretty cool.
This is easy.
So obviously, the next bit, it's, Dad, where can I buy some leather? And he said, well, go to Bermondsey. That's Bermondsey Road, was where all the leather tanners and factors were. And you got all the fittings.
Still there?
Yeah, the whole street, there was, Bermondsey Road looked nothing like it does today. And so it was very industrial.
Yeah. And probably very smelly then, by the sounds of it.
No, because they weren't tanning so much as finishing there. Right. Anyway, down I went and I found some amazing snake skins, coloured snake skins called Karung, K-A-R-U-N-G, Karung snake. And I thought, I could do something with these. And I thought about chokers. Chokers were like neck bands made out of leather or velvet with cameos on, and they were all the rage with miniskirts, Mary Quant time, early 70s. And so I borrowed a sewing machine. My girlfriend at the time helped me stitch them together, and we cut out a little butterfly out of the snakeskin, put it on top of the snake band, and went to Biber and sold them to Biber. And it's all a bit hard to imagine now how we did all these different bits, all on the kitchen table. And that worked, and that was the beginning. So I then went to my father and said, Dad, this was amazing. Could we start a business together? Would you help me? And he said, well, look, I can't do that because it wouldn't be right as I'm working for Clark's. But why don't we ask your mother if she'd be a sleeping partner? And we'll give you £500 for your 21st birthday present.
£500.
Yeah. And off you go. And we quickly realised that mother was sort of, I think, intrigued, but not quite sure what this was all about. And she'd been a top PA before the war, and a captain in the army. So she was pretty tough nut, and really sharp and together. So she became the sort of company secretary in charge of production, not that we had any at the beginning, and I was the designer, the marketeer, and I'd got my flat in London, so I'd race up and down from Somerset to London. And that was the beginning of Mulberry. £500 just about paid for the stationery and opened the bank account. And I remember Sydney Howe, who was the Lloyds Bank manager. You're doing what? And you'd like an overdraft of £1,000? Right, okay. And so anyway, it got us off the ground. And
so what were the first products at Mulberry? Because it sounds like you had quite an eclectic mix of things from chokers to...
Yeah. Well, it was quite simple. In those days, belts were what handbags have become as the sort of the key accessory product. And because fashion was moving so fast, it would go from the waist to the hips to, the focus moved around the body and swishy or tight or big shoulders. Yeah. So I was a belt designer, effectively, in the first 5 years of Mulberry, and you have no idea how much it changed. And I always made sure I'd go out to all the different shops, meet the buyers, understand what they're doing, what they were selling, and then I'd design my belts thinking of what they were going to do next. And it could be narrow, or it could be really wide, it could be huge buckles. So every season, literally, you had to be like a chameleon. You had to change your skin, change your colour, change everything you did, because if you didn't, you were out.
At what stage and what was the way in which you realised actually this is a business? Yes, lots of people can have people working, whether out workers, in workers, and it can be either efficient, inefficient. But at some stage, you realised you actually had a business.
Yeah. Well, remember, behind it, we had my father who would permanently give these charts to us. So, look, this is your gross margin. This is how you do profit and loss. This is how you build. I think the building and the costing was probably the thing that lasted my life the best. You have labour. You have the raw materials, be it the buckle, the leather, whatever it is. Labour, raw materials. You add those up. You then add the indirect overheads, which might be the transport or moving it around and whatever goes on. Add all that lot together. There's your total. Then you add your profit margin. And that's 100 or 140%, and that should be your end price. Then you look at what the market can take and you say, okay, double it, half it, this isn't going to work, it is going to work. And that fundamental knowledge passed down by my father. He did lots of other charts, which I never understood, even though I did my business studies. And so that set us off. And then mother was extremely disciplined in controlling things. So she would be meticulous in what was going out and controlling overheads. And because we were a belt manufacturer, our invoices compared with the dress manufacturer were pretty tiny to the boutiques that we're selling out to. So you'd often find that my mother would give 5% discount if you paid within 7 days. And my mother she's like the queen. She was, really hot on the telephone if people didn't pay up. And because it was a small bill, even if boutiques were cash strapped, they'd pay us because they'd use us as a reference. So we've got a really good cash flow machine going. So the support of my parents in that instance was really important. But what it enabled me to do was, I suppose, firstly, the elastic. So my father was in the background. He wasn't actually in the business, but he was constantly giving the support. My mother was the partner. She was the negative end of the bar. I was the positive one. So to me, anything was possible. For her, nothing was possible. So we'd have these huge arguments on the phone, me from London and her. No, you can't do that. And she'd put the phone down on me. Now, there's no partner in any business relationship that can put the phone down the other than your mother. I couldn't do it to her. But if you like, we could stretch through that because we were that relationship, and we did. And she was occasionally right and I was usually right. But, at the end of it all, we'd find the way to make that work. But the biggest thing of all was, of course, I was in London going out and selling and meeting the buyers. So I think one of the most important things is, as I was designing and making those first samples with our sample stitcher and father in the background, we would end up actually knowing would costed it, made it, took it to the buyer, got the reaction from the buyer, which was wow or no thank you.
Yeah.
So
But
you were putting
getting
yourself
those
on the line.
And you were getting those signals, so that
Yeah.
feedback real time.
Yeah.
So you did know
Yeah.
what the market wanted or what it would
Exactly.
likely take from you.
And then I went out from there to, once I'd got into the best boutiques, it's like a rolling ball, if you like. It just gets faster and faster, because what that meant was I could say, okay, well, I'm selling to so-and-so. Can I come and see you to a buyer? And then I headed over to France and did my first trip out in my little car to France, and didn't speak French, got stopped by the customs having the wrong documents, got put in jail for a night.
Seriously?
Yeah. Jail was an overstatement. They
You were
apprehended
put in
in custody, yeah. And came out the next morning, learned that if you want to get into France with samples, you have to actually carry a few extra and find out whether, yes, exactly. And we donated a lot over the years, but we got in and out of France and had a great relationship. But we were pretty successful fairly early on in France. And all of these things meant I could then start going to the magazines and say, oh, we're selling to Browns or whoever it might be. And they would love the belts. So the magazine girls would feature, be it Vogue or Harper's, whatever, would feature my belts in the editorials. Yeah. Then you go to a boutique, oh, I saw your belt in Vogue. So this sort of round robin was really important.
How did you get that flywheel working? Yeah, you clearly got... At what stage did you realise, actually, this is serious and I can build on this and actually take the initiative? So you're going over to France, going to other markets, you're taking new risks. So at what stage did you... And what was it that gave you that confidence to think, yeah, I'm ready to move? Or was it just bold courage?
Yeah, I think it was each little win. It was courage. I was also very shy in those days. You know, if you're going in with, a bit like an actor, you're going in for a go-see, if you like, and you're actually presenting your collection of things that you've designed, and the buyer can be absolutely... I mean, I remember the one in Paris. She was a real Grunhilde. She was probably 65, which now seems very young, but then it was pretty old, and tattily dressed in a back office au Printemps in Paris. And I'd gone in, it was my last appointment, and I'd actually done really well before that, so I was probably fairly high on succeeding elsewhere. Showed her my belts, and she said, oui, eh bien, ça fait combien? That's how much? And I said, oh, it's 5 ans, 50p would then be, whatever it was. And, eh bien, oui, je prends 1,000. I'll take 1,000. And I'm like, yes, I've done it. I'd only sold it at cost, not at a selling price.
So you'd forgotten all that guidance that your dad had given you about profit margins.
I got so excited about getting the deal that I got the price wrong. That didn't happen very often, fortunately, but I'd got in, and we were able to build from there. So I think every win gave you confidence, and things were moving so fast. We were doing 2 collections a year, spinning them out. Each collection would probably have about 40, 50 belts in it. You had to take your orders, you had to get your raw materials, and we got very good. And I suppose the big difference between us and pretty much everybody else in the fashion industry then was I was the designer, the producer, the wholesaler, and then ultimately we became retailers and did shop corners, and we were exporting, we were buying and selling. The leather was coming in from abroad, so we were having to... Currency would go up and down by 10% a year. Again, my father had this chart.
This is a long way down the...
No, this is pretty much early on. And father was, again, he was...
So you got shops very
No, the shops came much later. But the process of designing, manufacturing and wholesaling, most of the dress designers would be going to a third company to produce. Yeah. They wouldn't have their own factories. And that's why so many designers failed, because they had no idea how to sell or no idea how to manufacture. They could make beautiful things, but actually they couldn't produce it in volume. Now, because we had that very grounded Somerset family base, we were very unusual, and it also just took us out of that sort of almost unreal London world of spinning fashion. Yes, I was in it, but I was back out of it in the harsh reality of the factory. So I think from an early stage, people recognised that we could deliver on what we said, and we worked with people like Jeff Banks and Sterling Cooper, and that was other designers, and I was then designing the belts for them. Then did the same for Ralph Lauren and Enrico Coveri, lots of Italian and French and American designers. So pretty much then, within probably 3 years, I was designing for other designers.
Vested is the leading ShareTech platform. What does that mean? It means we make funding rounds a dream, so you can raise with ease. Our platform helps founders secure investment, scale fast, and succeed. Because companies that raise smart grow strong. So take the stress out of funding rounds and raise with confidence. For more info, search Vested.
Without the second need.
So that's interesting. So you were both the sales and front face of the business and the designer.
Yeah.
Are they different skill sets, or do you see them as very related, creative engagement?
For me, vital, because I'm picking up all... If you think, I'm designing for Enrico Coveri. Enrico, one of the best at the time Italian designers. He is right at the forefront of what's happening in Italy. I'm looking at the fabrics he's using. I'm touching everything. He's talking to me about his next collection, 6 months' time. I've got that knowledge, and I'm doing the same with Sterling Cooper in London or Ralph Lauren. So I'm picking all the time. And then my customers, my customers, the boutiques I'd be selling to, would be buying from those same... Oh, didn't I see your those are your belts that Enrico Coveri had, weren't they? So it gave me... I became part of the furniture, if you like, and people sort of accepted that Roger was the best belt designer, and produced great belts. So effectively, I became the go-to belt designer, and we then expanded into handbags, and then that moved on from there.
Just tell me, so all this came from the £500 that your dad had put into the business, you'd built it, and the profit margin and so on. At what stage did you go out to third parties, i.e. the banks or anybody else, to get money? And what did you have to have in the bag to get that support from them?
Hazy memory. No, it was very different in those days. So if you could prove your sales turnover and your profit, and we had a very good accountant, external accountant, who we would put the figures through regularly. If you could demonstrate that you were making profit, banks would give you a bigger overdraft. So effectively, your accounts had to be good. So they were, and we were growing very, very fast through the 70s. And so we did it effectively with bank overdraft and Mars, lovely, 5% 7 days, the cash came back in fast. But if you like, we were still working on a 6-month cycle, so we'd had to buy our raw materials. We had the labour with us all the time. So it was pretty vital that we made good profits and moved. But it was bank finance that did it, overdraft.
Finance and overdraft facilities. So you still owned the business?
Yeah.
100%, I guess, between you and your mum, your dad, and sleeping partners, etc. So at what stage did you decide, actually, that model doesn't work any longer?
Well, it rocketed through the 70s. We got to the end of the 70s, got our Queen's Award for export. Literally, as we were given it in 79, the market was just starting to wobble in America, and the pound dollar started to do an up and down. And literally, our prices, the pound effectively and dollar changed, that our prices went up by 30%, 40% even. So suddenly, not only us, but all of the European fashion designers got a big cold in America, and all of us had really rocketed into America in the second half of the 70s. So that suddenly was
that
nothing...
massive success became
nothing any of us had ever experienced before. So it was, what do we do next? How do we cope with this? And it was literally overnight. Because we were about a year ahead of Clark's and going into that recession, it really was tough. And our turnover dropped from then, I think, 1.5 million to 800,000 in 6 months at that rate. And that was massive. Dramatic. So we had no choice other than to stare ourselves in the face and say, what are we going to do? So we had to cut our workforce. We had to cut, I think, 40% of our workforce. And that was dramatic because we'd built up this amazing team. And we didn't really know what would come out with. But I think one of the biggest things through that was we talked about every season being different and every collection being totally different and driven by what was happening in fashion around the world. We then decided and talked to our best customers in France and Japan and America and said, well, look, you know, what are you doing? What was you... Roger, your best collection was your hunting, shooting, fishing collection in 1975, and did a little jacket, a blouson jacket in cotton, which was old army shirts that, again, remember my army uniform history. I bought one and I cut off the tails, and it was collarless with tab buttons through here. Cut it through the middle, put a zip in it. Tails were made into pockets, put a little leather collar on it. So it was shirt was all there, and zip, blouson bottom. And that jacket, we sold it all over the world in 75, 76 with a hunting, shooting, fishing bag and belt collection. And that was the huge success that piloted Mulberry off through the end of the 70s. But a year later, we dropped that because actually we moved on to something else and different colours and different things. But that's what we came back to. So in 1980, we created a collection around, I would say that's when we first created a brand as opposed to relying on our success as a designer. And that's where we opened these little corners and we used what we'd done on our exhibition stands in Paris.
But that was somebody told you that, or it was your own gut feel that
it
took
was
you
the
to
gut
that?
feel, but I remember there was a shop called Bob Shop in Paris, who's one of our best customers. He said, Roger, that was your best collection. And I always remember we sold mountains of that. Couldn't you go back to that and look at it? And so that was the inspiration to go back to. It was talking to, again, your customer. And vital part of any entrepreneur's life. So go back to that thing of you saying designer, marketeer, retailer, consumer. I'd always urge any entrepreneur, get out. I often get asked by students who I meet saying, I want to be a buyer or I want to be a designer. Yeah, great. You may have the skill, you may not. But unless you're prepared to work on the shop floor, as I did with John Michael, and as I often did with Mulberry, just go and talk to your customers, sell something to them.
I think it's invaluable to not know what somebody's willing to exchange some cash to you for.
Yeah.
You don't know. I mean, designs, 100, 10 a penny or whatever, but knowing when it fits, when you've got that product market fit, when somebody's willing to give you the cash, that's a big difference. So great story, lots of growth. You even adapted to the changing macro environment, exchange rates, going international. Then at what stage did you decide that actually this bank financing, or was it an idea of wanting to take, as people say now, take some money off the table, as it were? What made you decide to go beyond your own resources, you and your family?
We were probably always beyond our own resources, if you like. We were expanding so fast. Once we'd gone through that big hole of 79, 81, that's when we realised we had to create this image and something that customers could really relate to and come back to. So we created the shop, opened one in Paris, then opened one in London. Again, we had a bank finance and we'd come through the recession and we bounced back into profitability. But what we hadn't realised was we had, and this is again the naivety, we hadn't realised we'd stretched our cash flow massively, because effectively by opening the shops, we'd use capital to do that. And also our shops, we'd get paid 5% 7 days or whatever it is. Now we have the stock for 6 months. So suddenly our cash flow became much heavier.
Tied, yeah.
So we then came up with the idea of doing franchise shops. So we went to our Stockholm best retailer came to us and said, Roger, love what you've done in Paris. Could we do one of those? And we thought, yes, we could do that, couldn't we? So we would then design and manufacture the shop for him, sell him all the fixtures, sell him all the stock, and he would pay for it. So suddenly we'd come out of the retail heavy burden, and we created something. And our turnover in Sweden, when it started with, it was a bit slow, but once it took off massively. So our sales in Sweden were bigger than UK at one point. And then, would you believe it, the Gucci shop in Denmark, in Copenhagen, came and said, Roger, seeing the Swedish one. I said, well, hang on here, you're Gucci. Why would I want to sell to you? Well, no, you don't understand. It's a different customer. We would really love to do. So after a little bit of tittle-tattle backwards and forwards, we went for it. And she became our best franchisee ever. And she opened another one in Oslo, so Scandinavia. And we then had 2 in Denmark and Finland, and it all opened up through the region. And we'd done simultaneously Germany and so on. So doing the franchise route enabled us to expand effectively by the cash flow.
So how many franchises did you end up issuing?
We probably had about 40 in the end, I should think.
At peak?
At peak. We even had 9 shops in Japan.
Don't you think that was a bit of a brand stretch for Mulberry? I mean, moving from belts to then all sorts of garments and then through to home furnishings. I mean, big brand stretch.
Massive. And if you like...
And franchises, obviously.
Yeah. Big and big risk. And of course, this is always, isn't it, about risks and opportunity and threat. The threat to fashion at that stage was enormous. The threat to us as a brand who had perhaps become a little bit too successful was probably double big, because actually that's just the moment when somebody coming out with something different and a different name will get attention. And Gucci and Prada were just coming up through at that moment in the early 90s. So Gucci, glitzy, Prada, cool, and nylon bags. I did nylon bags too, but nobody looked at mine. They were looking at the Prada ones. And I just knew that we were probably going to not go backwards, but would probably float for a while. So firstly, I knew we had to bring in more finance. Secondly, I could see the home opportunity because everybody was cocooning, the home environment, nobody's going out to restaurants. It was all safety, take care.
Again, a lot of this seems to be more gut feel than tangible numbers that you could count on. It really seems like it was your gut feel. But what triggered that gut feel to make some of these decisions? Because that's what I think so many founders or entrepreneurs need to try and tap into.
I think it was because I changed and added product all the way through, from belts to handbags to luggage to sunglasses to watches to, I dabbled in just about designing and manufacturing and costing every single product you could make. So going into Mulberry Home might seem difficult. And I think as I researched, I went to an exhibition called Decorex and just looked at what was happening, what they were doing. And bear in mind, we'd already been buying the fabrics and making furniture for the shop. So we sort of knew, and we had people making for us. So it wasn't quite a bigger step. The big step was could we jump industry, if you like? And I obviously didn't know that. What I did know was that we had to do something. And if the press were going to lose interest in us on the fashion side, this might be the thing that really caught, and it was. So Elle Décoration came out that year for the first time. A lady called Ilse Crawford, who was one of the great home press darlings, she became editor. I went to her and said, Ilse, I'm doing this new Mulberry Home collection. She said, oh, that's amazing. We're launching Elle Deco all over the world. Could you be the cover? And could we do a whole thing with you? And we said, absolutely. So we did that. And Elle Deco was the new cool in that world. And home decoration became the new cool fashion. So actually, although I'd jumped industry, I was actually at the front of fashion. So fashion was a bit tired at the moment generally. Now I was what was happening. So I was in the right space. So that was the good news. Now how to finance it. So I went out to the venture capital market and talked through my merchant banker and talked to Kleinwort, Charterhouse and Phoenix. And Charterhouse said, look, we'd love to lead this and we'd like 25% of the shares. And it's going to be, I can't remember what it was, it came out, maybe it was 7 million, probably 4 million in at that stage. So probably valuing us at 12 million or something.
What do you thought the business was worth at that stage?
I don't think I really knew. I think we just got the advice.
So I'm just wondering, did you go into that feeling, because 12 million today is not massive, but at that stage, just remind me of the year?
1990.
1990. And so at that stage, so you didn't know whether this was good, bad or indifferent, is what you're saying?
Well, no, we obviously had advice, and the advice was...
No, I meant in terms of your own gut feel when you went and you first had those indications from the...
No, we were given advice of, multiples
advisors.
Of or whatever it might be. Can't remember what our turnover was then, but at the end of it seemed fine, but the one bit of advice we didn't get was, so they pay their money in. I did get, I think, $1 million out or something like that at that stage. So that enabled me to buy a bit more of the house and do something with my racing cars or whatever it was. So that was good. But what we hadn't realised was that it was deeply discounted loan notes. Now, I didn't know what one of those was, and I don't think anybody really knew what they were. But what it meant was the interest would roll up every year, and it was at 30%.
Ooh.
So if you take 4 million 30% of 4 million a year. That's at 1.3 million or something. We were rolling up on a scale.
So these advisors,
Yeah,
have they not
exactly.
explained it to you, or you just hadn't understood it?
Well, I'd love to say my financial director hadn't understood it, but clearly I hadn't understood it either. And we probably had, but we probably thought, well, we'd be fine because we're now accelerating and sales going off again. And they did. And we rocketed through, highly profitable for the first 5 years of the 90s. And Mulberry Home, all the franchise took it up as well. We opened up a new American market with it, and that was great. But we then hit about 95 and realised, whoops, next year we're going to have to repay these guys, or we're going to have to reschedule it, and it's going to be expensive. So our merchant banker came back and said, there is now a new thing called the AIM stock market, alternative investment market, I think it was, and you could be one of the first to go on that market. And, you know, your turnover is amazing, you're highly profitable. I think this could be the way to take them out. So we did that. We had a stock market launch and we paraded ourselves in front of everybody. I remember the headline on the Times was "Saul brings colour to the market" on the front flag of the paper. And I got used to talking to financial journalists and we had a good story. So it was all good. But we floated in the market multiple times oversubscribed. So that was
Brilliant.
great. But
Excellent.
it could have been, we could have brought more money in. And if I look back at any mistake I made, it was that fear of losing control. So now we'd sold, let's imagine it was 25% already gone. So we were now up to somewhere near that 40% probably of the company was on the market.
Yeah, but you were still the sole owner of the,
we were still,
you, the family, was still
yeah,
60%.
60% or 56, 60%. So that seemed fine, but what we hadn't foreseen was Tony Blair came to power, Gordon Brown gave control of sterling to the Bank of England based on inflation, and the pound soared high by 30%. Now, again, we were a massive net exporter, and we were going, oh, what does this mean? And we were selling in local currency. We were selling forward for 6 months. So we had a pretty sophisticated operation. So we were fine in the short term. But we'd been used to currency doing this. My father's good old handwritten graph showing what it would do was no use whatsoever because it had gone 30. And none of us knew when it would come back. And we all assumed it would come back within a year, as it normally did. It didn't. It stayed there. So as we went towards this, we were going, wow, what are we going to do? We hadn't brought in any extra money. The venture capitalists were safely out and smiling because they'd made a fortune.
So cool Britannia, where Britain was right at the peak, actually created some challenges for exporters.
Yeah, and
even though the brand was great.
There were very few exporters. So fashion generally was an import business. They were all creaming it in because they were having all their imports are coming in at 30%.
Yeah.
So again, it was that thing of, have we got leprosy? What is the matter with us? And I remember being on Paxman, and he said, but Roger, surely you've made lots of money. You don't care where you manufacture. And I was furious. I said, look, I've got 500 people working for me. Every one of those works their hearts out. I don't want to lose one job. This is going to mean I've got to move half my manufacture abroad. And that has to be wrong for the country. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but, so there was and then on that programme, there were pictures of bleating sheep next to the factory, exporters bleating at, so it was really, really tough. But what did we do? We moved 40% abroad. We went from making 2 million profit to losing 1 million in a year, just on currency. Wow. And that's the thing. I think most people have no idea the effect currency has on trading and commercial reality. And it's one of the big gaps, I think, in our commercial understanding of business. We can come back to that one. But so we moved it abroad. We went to Turkey, went to China. We moved all our luggage manufacture to Taiwan and then to China. Got the margins back everywhere. Turkey we could make as well.
When we look at Mulberry, because I want to get onto the Sharpham, you brought the food bit up a second ago. We want to get onto that in a minute. But just tell us about those latter stages on the Mulberry journey, and especially the VC aspect of it.
Yeah. So the VC aspect we had effectively solved by getting them out through going on the AIM market. We traded very well. We then got hit by the Gordon Brown scenario and the pound. Our bankers made it very clear straight away, watching that dramatic change in profitability.
Yeah.
Bank began with a B, and they'd been charming, but up until then they suddenly went, oh, now you need to bring in external investment. So we had to go out yet again, a fairly short order from going on the stock market, which is why you look back and think, well, why didn't you bring in more? Because if I'd bought in another couple of million,
Then you
it
would have given yourself a longer runway.
Yeah. So out we went, and our advice was, there's a really good company in Singapore. It's run by a lady called Christina Ong, and they owned pretty much 70% of Bond Street in the retail brand names, of designer brand names. So she was the British arm for many of those American and Italian brands. So we went out, met with Christina. All seemed good, and she came in and said, yes, we'd like to buy in. I think they invested 7 million for 40% of the company at that stage, and that we would do a joint venture together in America, where we'd own America 50-50, and they would put in $15 million into an American market.
So
I
the
looked
7 in the UK plus the 15 for the US.
$15 million into the US. And I thought, actually, whatever happens here, even if I eventually do lose out, financially I've done the right deal, and the company needs it, so we'll do it. As soon as she was in, it was very clear that she wanted me out, and that actually she thought she'd bought the brand buying 40%, even though I had 45%, or a bit more probably. So we looked at it, and...
So when you say it was clear that she wanted you out, was that because your personalities clashed, or the value that she felt that she had brought to the table was disproportionately going to you? Was it a money thing or a personality thing?
I don't think personality came into it. I think she just wanted to own the brand. That was the deal she'd done. And she decided she wasn't going to do America until she had got control. And I think...
even though she'd sold you on that idea of
yes,
the US.
Yeah. And the city loved it. They thought I'd done a super deal. And they kept asking, well, when's America going to happen? I go, well, we're waiting for Christina Ong to commit to it, and she kept saying, yes, we're going to do it, and then she wouldn't. So that doubt started to sow seeds, and then literally almost straight away, she asked if we could have a lunch together, and over lunch with her henchman, she said, Roger, we'd like you to step back to president, and we would like you to step out of the direct running of the business. And I said, Christina, that's not what I had in plan, but we want to work with you. We appreciate what you're bringing to the business, and we'd really like to work with you to make a success of the brand. Now, I think my mistake was that we had worked really hard through some very difficult things where our Japanese distributor gone bust, and we had to buy it out, and we had worked with the big bankers over there, and we'd really got used to working and listening to what you said and then telling them what you felt. And Japanese way of doing business is very respectful and very accommodating, but could be very strong. But ultimately, you place your position, you listen, you answer, and so on. That's what we did. So we had just been badly advised, and we took the wrong route. So we backpedaled on that and took the decision, we're not going to, if there's anything they want, rather than disagree with it for the sake of disagreeing, if there's anything they want and we can't see a reason why not, we will do it. But they had 2 members of the board, we had 5 more. So actually there wasn't very much in theory other than making it, but they had one thing, which was a last decision over ready-to-wear. Now, what does last decision mean? Well, we sort of thought, well, we produce the collection, it takes 6 months, nothing much they can do. Her last decision became, no, I don't like the collection. You can't sell it.
Before it went into...
And you finished it. So that was pretty dramatic, and we would find a way through that and probably sell it or not. But it was destructive within the team. The team completely lost heart.
Can I just check? So that last decision was more a case of whether she felt it was right for the market at that point in time, or the style?
No, she'd just come in right at the last presentation time. We wouldn't see her all year. And then she'd come in, right? She wouldn't even look at the books at the beginning or what we were designing. She'd just come in at the end and go, don't like it.
Okay.
So for the team, it was we just spent 6 months building a collection. She's walked in and said, out of nowhere, and they didn't know what relationship she had with us other than she was an investor, said, don't like it. And we managed, we found our way through those things, but it was a horrible little screw coming in.
You were then essentially, having built up a collection, you were spending money that wasn't then fructifying or rewarding you. So you were ultimately going to end up being less efficient as a business.
Yeah. Well, we were, just like in any other business crisis you may have, it becomes intrusive in size of what it is within your thought patterns and what you're trying to do, because it's almost like you've got an injury. You can't run at 100%. So, and we took the attitude that we were going to try and accommodate rather than attack or fight. So we weren't looking for a battle. Yeah. And we worked that for a couple of years. And it was only in the last probably 6 months of those 2 years when I realised that, actually we had an idea that Godfrey Davis, his original Arthur Anderson partner who come in as an investor, that he was too close to her, and that as vice chairman and ex-FD, he always seemed to be sort of siding with her or saying, and we finally came to a meeting. I remember it was the Post Office Tower, and I kept my notes in my Mulberry Filofax afterwards. And Godfrey kept saying to me as we went in, what's your position, Roy? What do you think? What do you think you want to do? And I was thinking, well, I don't know. We'll just see what they say and come with. And there was their board directors, one of whom was called Dr. Death within the city. So he was a professional, was put on boardrooms to destabilise and see if he could knock them out.
Interesting.
So I won't say what his name was, but they had 3 or 4 others there who were all henchmen of the Ong team. And they came in and they sat down in this office and said, Roger, we're going to get straight to the point. We want you to resign today, and we want you out of the business by tomorrow. And we want all your family out as well, and that's how it's going to be.
And the basis for that?
That was it.
The business was running okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it was brutal. And this had been the end of a long period of, sort of
and the
different
business
things.
was being run by people, your team.
Yeah.
They were your leadership team. They were your people on the floor, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was pretty dramatic. But in some ways it wasn't a surprise. And they said, if you don't do that, we're going to call in independent accountants to verify, because we believe your stocks are incorrect. And as a major shareholder of this size, we can do that. And they did that. And it was only then that I thought, actually, so my fears of Godfrey Davis by then were starting to concrete. And, if he was really on their side, effectively, he was now actually in a difficult position, because as directors, we are all responsible for our stocks.
Yes.
So actually, he was tied into me whether he liked it or not. And I knew our stocks were fine. We had nothing to hide, but clearly this ghost director, if you like, had decided this was the best thing to try and see. So that we then had to have these accountants crawl all over the business for 6 weeks, destabilising again for the team. Though. What are they doing here? What are they being called? So it was probably called as a thing. So it was, again, very demotivating for the team around us. And you could just see shoulders going down.
You just stand back and say, yes, I'll stand down tomorrow. And
No. So we defeated that, pushed it back. And actually, I thought, we've actually won. We've shown them that we are actually capable. They haven't been able to knock us back. They've taken a head-on attack now.
Vested is the best-rated ShareTech platform. What does that mean? It means that we make share schemes a dream. And over 90% of our customers agree that their scheme has helped them to retain, recruit, and to lead and succeed. Because companies that share stakes share success. So get them invested by giving a slice of the pie. For more info, search Vested.
Without the second E.
Just out of interest, how old were you at this stage?
About 10. No, how old was I? I would have been 23 years ago. I would have been 51, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, for a less, because I mean, you'd been in the game, as it were, for 30 odd years, and by this stage, you had depth of understanding and experience in your business, and even understanding your investors. But I mean, can you imagine a younger Roger in that position and that sort of approach, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, I think
how would that younger Roger have responded, or what would you advise him?
I think you have to make choices, and obviously I was talking to Monty, my wife, and the family all the way through this, and did we surrender at any point, and what was the point of carrying on if this was going to be? I mean, we had 2 years of really heavy times when you were just desperately trying to just get through each day and not quite knowing what the next one was going to bring, whilst trying to drive the business forward positively. And actually, bizarrely, this time, early 2000s, was just when Mulberry took off again. We'd done the IT bag. We were absolutely flying on the front end, because I knew, again, the sixth sense of what's going to happen next is what I've grown up with. I knew that when we got through 2000, that Gucci glitter and Prada silver, it was going to turn back and look, instead of the future spaceship, it was going to look back at what happened in the last millennium. 70s was fashion and music. So it was always going to, and that was when Mulberry had its heyday. So I knew we had a huge story to come out with, and we did. And we just took off. So on the one hand, again, there I was flying on the one side, but not fighting a bank, fighting an investor. So I think you just get used to that, you are like a submarine when you're an entrepreneur. Actually, be it cash flow, investment, decisions, or positive and negatives, you are probably, if you're growing at the sort of rate you need to survive and thrive, you're probably underwater in some form or other for 90% of the time. So you have your periscope up, and occasionally you come up with a huge burst of bubbles, and success is fantastic, and all the things, the profit, the cash flow, all come together. But the rest of the time you're underwater with one of those things surviving, and you become incredibly resilient, and you get very good at looking at the detail around you, but also surfing over the horizon all the time, looking at where the next torpedo's coming from or where the next sun's going to come up.
Yeah. That's a brilliant way of looking at it. But you're right. I mean, it's not the notion of being an entrepreneur has loads of glamour associated with it often, but it is a tough journey. So tell me, 2 years after the meeting, you said that you decided. What made you decide to step aside?
Oh, I didn't. It happened. So we'd come through this accountant investigation with full honours, headed on. I thought, we've done it. We've battered them off. And I still wasn't quite sure what was going on with Godfrey Davis, but I thought we've now done enough to make sure that they realise they can't torpedo us.
Yeah.
And that had been about July, August. We got to September. Sadly, through all of this period, Monty's father had been very ill with cancer, and he finally died.
Sorry.
And it was Cameron, my middle son's 18th birthday, at literally the same weekend we were going to bury him. And Monty said, look, Cliffy would have wanted us to go to Paris, which was Cameron's favourite city, and take the whole family to Paris for the weekend. So we buried Cliffy, flew out to Paris, and we're just having a café au lait in our favourite cafe when through came a phone call from Vanessa, my PR in London. And I said to Monty, look, I really don't want to take it. Can you take it? So Monty took the call. I think actually Cameron took the call and came back and said, Roger, it was Vanessa, Christina Ong, has done an article, main full-page article in the Sunday Telegraph tomorrow, calling for your resignation as CEO and chairman.
On what grounds?
I can't remember what the grounds were almost, but there was a page of stuff why she'd called it, and so we went to work, and I started phoning all the journalists I knew, which I knew a lot through my city work. So we had the Times, Normal Telegraph, FT and so on, ready with very serious riposts on the Monday, calling into question her and what she was trying to do. But the Sunday Telegraph was going to come out. Try to get hold of the directors. Godfrey Davis, of course, was on holiday in Barbados. So that had all, so if you like, it had all been pre-organised. They knew when Cliffy was likely to die. They knew when Cameron's birthday was, and we'd booked Paris ahead. So the ruthlessness about how they hit it was just incredibly cold. It was absolutely, we're going to get them and kill them. They won't have time to respond because they're going to be in Paris. They couldn't get anything out on Monday. I did, but only because Vanessa phoned me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known until I opened Telegraph, which I wouldn't have done on the Sunday. So pretty ruthless. And then I was flying on, actually, would you believe, to Milan to interview a potential CEO, because I actually wanted to get a new CEO in and step back to chairman. And so I did that, flew back then from there to Denmark, where I knew we had a 4% shareholder, met him and said, look, I need your help. Because otherwise, if I can't get over 50%, I can't bat off their fight. So he said, look, Roger, I'd love to, but I'm here for the money. I'm not going either way. I'm not going to vote for them or for you. So effectively, I was out by Thursday of the business as CEO and chairman.
Wow.
And there was nothing I could do about it. It was just a clinical... But I still owned 46% of whatever it was of the company. So it was a bizarre situation. So I was still on the board. I was still the major shareholder.
I'd love to explore that a lot further and a lot deeper, because I mean there seems to be a good few stories around that. But let's pick up on the rebirth of Roger and how you came out on the other side and into a totally different arena.
Yeah.
How did that come to pass?
Well, so we then entered a difficult legal and negotiation period, which I won't go into, for the next 6 months, trying to get any money out, which we couldn't because nobody wanted 46% of the company if they couldn't control anything. So that was difficult. But equally, I knew she was going to do a rights issue, which would then diminish my shareholding, and I had no money, which she knew. And Barclays were behind this, so we had a difficult period of that going on. So I held out for 9 months, and then I just had an epiphany of a moment when I went, do you know, why am I doing this? And I had a great friend who was an incredible help to me during this period, who we set out to see if we could find investors to take that shareholding. And lots of people, yes, we'd love to. Lots of the really big guys, oh no, she's got 46%. Sorry, Roger, we can't. We just can't. And if you look, that's what's happening right now for Mulberry with their current negotiations. They're trying to buy it, but her percentage is so big, the incoming party can't get in. So long story short, out of that, I actually at a board meeting finally said, no, I'm going to sell my shares. And I then went out and had to go and visit all of those institutions that I bought in when I floated the company and said, look, guys, I'm prepared to sell you my shares at 53p, which was a pittance, because I know as soon as I'm out, she will invest and the company will fly, because we are flying already, but with that investment, it'll just go crazy. They all bought into my story. They all bought the shares. They all made a fortune, 53p to, I think, £10.
That's all?
Yeah, that's all. And we came out with some money, and the farm came up for sale at the same time. That was part of the reason that I actually took the decision of an epiphany, was because the farmer came around from next door and said, we owned the house, he owned the farm next door, and he said, I'm putting the farm on the market on Monday. And what? So I begged, stealed and borrowed the money to buy it, and then sold my shares afterwards. And then had the farm. So now we had this amazing farm that we'd lived in the middle of, so to
Yeah.
speak, in the house for 30 years, and set about to become a farmer, an organic farmer. And as we were going through the process, my sister said, "What are you going to grow?" And I said, "We're going to grow organic wheat, and we're going to have beef, and we're going to put the deer back, and all those things." She said, "Well, why don't you grow spelt?" She, poor girl, was suffering from cancer too. And I hadn't heard of spelt, and looked it up, and looked fascinating. Why isn't anybody growing this?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Found out later why nobody was growing it, but that was later. And went and bought seed in Germany, sowed it, went organic, and just had the most wonderful journey of understanding the soil, learning how to go organic, and watching the land come alive with birds and bees and insect activity and everything. And
I guess,
I've done that for
had
20
it
years.
not been organic before,
No, it had
and
been
so it had been
yeah.
depleted of all its
well, not
nature.
nature, yes. I mean, it was a very rich soil, so
Yeah.
it was been dairy, so effectively it hadn't been sprayed left, right, and centre. So that was the good news. But the cows definitely had a lot of antibiotics in them and so on. So then I've spent the last 20 years thinking, well, okay, now I need to apply all the rules I've learnt. I have to get close to the consumer.
Yeah.
As a farmer, I haven't a chance. Margins are useless. I'll lose money and scale. Quickly found that the sheep and the beef and you can't have all those things. It doesn't work on 300 acres. So gradually bits went. And meantime, we'd also opened up Kilvercourt Designer Village. And remember, we also had opened Charlton House Hotel, got our Michelin star in our first year.
Yeah,
So
very
it actually
impressive.
put Mulberry Home in there, and that had become the example of how you can live it, buy
Yeah.
it, eat it, or whatever. And thought, okay, well, now I can grow all of this cereal, beef, and I've got a butchery
From
at
farm
the...
to
So we could
table.
literally take it all the way through, and we did, and we took it all the way through. Definitely found
or
butchery.
plate even.
Yes, butchery was not what we wanted to do. And you always had too many beef animals or not enough, so
Yeah.
it never quite worked. So we learned on the way through and gradually sophisticated both the designer outlet village side, sold the hotel in about 2009. That's a whole other story, roller coaster of a business. I think probably one of the most exciting businesses we ever did, but so dependent on your staff. When your staff are flying, but they're all actors and actresses because they're on their pins all the time, and effectively fatigue or
Yeah.
disgruntlement or dislike of each other. One of those things comes in at some point. So we had the first 10 years, they were amazing. The last few years were quite tough in terms of that because we lost the key guys. But anyway, so we came through that, did the Designer Outlet Village, did that with Freddie, my son, and that was amazing. We got the best designers in the world, got the turnover up to 11 million and got voted the shopping design village of the year.
Yeah.
So we've done so many different things, probably done far too many things, but going back to Sharpham Park, we got the spelt absolutely flying, then got hit by Brexit, where we lost all our exports overnight because it just became too expensive for our retailers in Europe to
And it wasn't
import.
a big UK.
Yeah, it was big, but we lost about 25% of our turnover overnight.
Right.
Then we've had this recent crisis, which basically made supermarkets came out of premium and went into price, which they always do when there's a recession, which is understandable. And I could just see there was going to be no future in a premium spelt product vertically run through, and margins got tighter and tighter. So I just quietly closed it down and kept my walnuts that I planted 30 years ago.
Well, Roger, I'd love to have you back in again to talk about that pivot, your personal pivot into the food and farming space, because they are actually two quite different things. They sound very similar and one becomes the other, but from a business perspective, very, very different. So I would love to have you back in again if you're up for it.
Love to. Well, it's a very big subject, as you say, and I think the only similarity is that the weather does affect both.
Yeah.
And you do have to plan a year out. So those two are common.
Yeah.
But you're touching the soil, you're in nature. And I've been so lucky in the last 20 years to have that experience.
It seems so, it's almost like cyclical. You talked about some of the fashion stuff that you were doing in the 70s around the shooting, fishing, being out in the English countryside. And you're back in that now yourself. I mean, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been absolute delight. I could literally sit here and listen to you for hours on end, but we'll pick it up again for the second half of your adventure. Thank you very much, Roger.
Love to. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of FounderMetrics. Remember, even the biggest of ambitions are completely doable when you know what to manage and track. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and you'll never miss another one. You can visit us on www.vested.com, where you'll find piles of additional resources, articles and exclusive content. You can also join our thriving community of entrepreneurs and founders by following us on the usual socials and YouTube. Until next time, stay inspired, stay driven and keep writing your own success story.